Hello everyone, welcome to week 1 of the 1950s Sisters Dress Sew Along. We are using my new pattern, which is the 1950s Sisters Dress pattern. This blue dress is inspired by White Christmas. It has the strapless Sweetheart bodice, and then it has a lace overlay, a circular skirt, a tulle overskirt, and then the sashes as well. This is view A. You can see there are 3 views, view B and view C, and you can see photographs of those dresses made up on edelweisspatterns.com. So once you have selected which view you're going to make, the next thing to do obviously is to choose your size. And of course this is for intermediate seamstresses, so you should know this already, but pattern sizes and off the rack or off the peg sizes do not match up. Numbers wise, if you are a size 6 in store-bought clothes, you will wear a size 12 in patterns. So completely disregard the numbers. This is just the way patterns have been made for many decades. Go by your measurements. So let's say you're 34-inch bust, 26.5-inch waist, 36-inch hips. You will be size 12. Again, don't worry about the number. Don't let yourself get caught up on that. Just go with what you know is going to fit. And I see my kitty has just entered the room. Let's hope she'll behave. Okay, so once you've selected your view and your size, we're going to cut out the pattern, and then I'm actually going to have you guys start out sewing the skirt. So yeah, go ahead and cut out the skirt, and then I will... Hi, kitty. And then we'll go from there. So for this video, I'm making view A, which is the classic White Christmas inspired costume. And I'm using a stretch taffeta for my foundation fabric, tulle for the overskirt, and a scalloped lace for the bodice overlay. So as I mentioned, we are going to start with the skirt first. And the reason for this is just because the skirt needs to hang for 3 days if at all possible. So it really just makes sense to sew that part first. Of course, with this sew along, we will be taking more time than 3 days, but it's just a good habit to get into when you're making a 1950s dress. It's very standard for dresses with skirts of a circular nature. So I'm following the yardage layouts for the skirt, and I'm cutting 4 pieces of my taffeta using pattern piece number 8. And next I'm going to cut 8 pieces of the tulle, since there will be 2 layers of tulle overskirts. Definitely do note, if you are making views B or C, you'll only cut 4 pieces of your overlay fabric. But for view A with the tulle skirt, you need 8 pieces. So now I'm cutting my skirt notches and making sure they make it through all of those layers. So now I'm sitting down at my machine with a mug of tea, and this mug, by the way, is from the Simplicity Vintage collection. It's inspired by vintage patterns, which is pretty neat. I think this design is obsolete. I think it's an older one, but I do believe there are some similar designs from Simplicity that I'll link below. And so it's time to start sewing. So as you can see from the instructions, we're going to attach the skirt pieces at the side seams, but we're going to leave one side open for the back opening. And my pin cushion is pink because everything is better when it's pink, of course. And I have my machine set to a 2.5 stitches per inch setting, and I am going to crank these seams right out. So be sure to trim the threads on both ends of that seam. Okay, and we're on to the next seam. now all 4 skirt pieces are attached in the taffeta layer with one side open for the back opening. And the first step for the seams is to press them flat. Obviously, you'll want to make sure you adjust the heat setting on your iron to be appropriate for the fiber content of your fabric. So give it a good press, and then I'm going to open up the seam allowances by finger pressing. And finger pressing is a good technique for heavier fabrics like this taffeta to make sure it will lay flat when you start to press it. Honestly, one of the biggest giveaways of a homemade looking garment is when you see seams that are poorly pressed and they just don't hang right and they look funny. So if you learn to take the extra steps in pressing like I'm doing here, it's going to make all the difference in your finished garments. So now I'm pressing both seam allowances to one side, and finally I'm going to trim and grade the seam allowances down to around 3/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm setting my machine to a wide zigzag stitch. Alternately, you can use a serger, but I prefer this way as it's just more authentic to the 1950s. The serger wasn't really used for home sewing until the 1960s when the first baby lock was born. It did exist in the textile industry prior to that, but zigzag or pinked seam allowances were much more common for homemade dresses, and honestly, even most store-bought clothing back then was not serged on the inside either. So once I've finished all the seam allowances with a zigzag stitch, I'm going to put the taffeta layer aside so that we can move on to the tulle layers. So you can see here I've separated my tulle into 2 piles, one set of 4 and a second set of 4. And a shiny tulle like this one, it does have a front and a back, but you can only differentiate between the two by touch. It's not really something you can see. One side is scratchier, and that side is going to pick up lint and thread and anything you come in contact with. And the smooth side is what we would consider the right side of the fabric. So be sure to put the smooth sides together when you start sewing these seams. I'm stitching the side seams in the tulle just as I did with the taffeta, with a standard 5/8 inch seam. There is no pressing with tulle, so once the seam is finished, I'm moving straight on to trimming the seam allowances down. So the first layer is finished with the 3 seams, and I've laid it out on my cutting table with the inside facing up. And now back at my machine, I'm going to assemble the second layer using the exact same steps that I did for the first one. And now I'm laying the second layer of tulle on top of the first layer to form it into one skirt. And it does take a bit of work to match up all the seams, as tulle really has a mind of its own. And once it's all lined up, you want to pin it in place at the waist edge, and then you're going to stitch through both layers at once. Okay, so the tulle layers are now in one piece, and it's time to add it to the taffeta skirt. So lay out the taffeta skirt first with the tulle layer on top, and pin them together at the waist edge, and you'll obviously want all seam allowances facing in. And once everything is lined up and pinned in place, you're going to stitch through all those layers to combine everything into the final skirt. Okay, so it looks great, and we're going to let this hang for a few days. I'm folding it in fourths and using a sturdy pants hanger, and by next week, all the bias will have hung out so we get a nice clean hemline in this circular skirt. So next week, for week 2 of the Sew Along, we will be constructing the foundation bodice, and I can't wait to see you next time here on the Edelweiss Patterns YouTube channel.